Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today's guest is former All-Pro kicker of the NFL. He played 9 years in the league, as well played most of his career in Jacksonville for the Jaguars, and is the owner of Proform Kicking Academy located in North Florida. Please welcome Mike Hollis. Mike, thanks for being on today's episode. I'm super excited to talk Jaguars football and to talk all things kicking with you.
Awesome. I love both those subjects, so we're in good hands.
So first things first, you're just coaching today. What's it like to be able to still be coaching something that you love so much in the midst of what's been going on, and how have things been in that regard for you with coaching kickers, despite many of the uncertainties of what has been with college football in the last season?
Well, I love it. And one of the things that, I learned all the stuff that I know from a guy by the name of Jim Gaetano, and it's very different. And the thing that is really kind of an eye-opener for a lot of athletes and more so the parents, because they're the ones, paying the money for the services, of course, for the sessions. But with regards to the fact that I played 9 years in the NFL and I was all pro and I did a lot of cool things at the stature of, 5'7", I'd say 5'8" on a really good day, but 5'7" officially. At 180 pounds, I was doing things that, guys that twice my size were doing. So my point saying that is that the fact that, and I'll add one more. I wasn't extremely athletic. I was just a very average athlete, maybe a little bit above average athlete, but it was technique that did it for me. And so if I'm able to do the things that I did in the NFL at my size, I know that anybody can do that. It's just a matter of how much time and effort they want to put into the technique. Now, the only drawback is it's a lot different than a lot of things that are being taught out there today, which is very unfortunate. But also it's different than what common sense kicking would tell you. We don't do a lot of lateral motion with the stuff we teach. And most people think a soccer style kicker needs a lot of lateral motion to kick the ball, and you don't. So I want to use 100% of me to kick the ball, and that's what I did. And that's what I'm teaching now. And in order to achieve that or have that ability to use 100% of my body weight and all of me into the kick, I've got to go more forward than laterally. So we teach a way that shows kids how the ball actually goes a certain direction based on body position, forward momentum, and actually the direction of the swing. So I love it. It's definitely something that is different. We compare it to like golf. Golf has been around a million years, and there's a standard now. That in the professional golf, the 199th ranked golfer in the world can beat the number one ranked golfer in the world on any given day. They are all that good because there's been a kind of a basic foundation that golfers who are good and even guys that are teaching golf, they're all focusing on pretty much the same stuff. Well, kicking still hasn't reached that area where there's kind of a basic foundation that works for everybody. Kicking is different, and unfortunately still guys are out there teaching different stuff too. So I fight the common sense kicking mentality of these kickers that think that they have to do a lot of lateral stuff, and even worse is I fight these coaches that are teaching the stuff that I wouldn't ever recommend doing. And so it is a little bit of a challenge that way, but I really enjoy seeing the success we've had from a lot of the kids we worked with, and if they can hold on to the form and technique and go off to college and be successful, I'm happy, man. I've succeeded. It makes me feel good.
100%. And especially when it comes to the comparisons people make between kicking and golf, there are a lot of similarities in terms of technique being important and how much it has evolved as well over time. You look at kickers now in the NFL, the standard to which they're held is so insane compared to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so while each kicker may have their own different specific techniques and things that are unique to their own style, the ways in which kicking fundamentals have evolved over time, maybe in some areas it's changed a lot, but in others it really hasn't. You mentioned your physical frame and how you were able to do so much during your career in the NFL. And here in Canada, there's a similar comparison to some kickers in the league here who've played at well under 5'10" or, 170 pounds dripping wet kind of thing. And they've been able to be super good because they're consistent and because they use all of their body. Because we all wish that we could have the frame of a Justin Tucker or guys that are 6'2" and 200 and they can just crush 55 yards easy. But how did you then really hone the techniques to be able to use all of your body? Was it a long time before you started playing college, or when did that evolution change that allowed you to really elevate your game before going to the NFL?
Well, that's a great question, because in high school, so my coach, Jim Gattano, who I mentioned before, he was coached by the same high school coach I was. He's older than me. He's like, 8, 9, 10 years older than me. And he came back after he worked out for, tried out for the NFL for many years. He finally got in, and he finally got in 1987 with the Chiefs. And so he was competing against Nick Lowry, and he made it all the way through the final cuts and then got released. Nick Lowry is a legend, of course. So it was kind of a challenge for him to do that. But, when he was released, he came back to Spokane, Washington, where we are both from, and went around the local high schools, just working with the kickers that were out there. And, in high school, I didn't, he only came like once every couple of weeks or something. So, and it wasn't ever a set schedule. He'd just show up every once in a while. And so he'd work with me, of course. And, in high school, you don't listen too much. You're like, who's this guy? What's he saying? I don't even know. I'll listen to him. But then once he leaves, I'm going to go back to doing my own stuff. And that's exactly what I did. And he was sitting right here right now today. I'd tell him the same thing. And he'd say, yeah, you did. But, Jim helped me, get into college with regards to kind of helping me with the recruiting process. Although I only went to a junior college, I didn't go to university right out of the gate. I went to University of Idaho after 2 years of junior college. And anyway, so after I went off to junior college, I didn't see Jim, and he moved down to California. He was coaching, doing his own thing down there, and I didn't know if I'd ever see him again or hear from him again. And then I was playing Idaho. I went to University of Idaho, and we were playing Eastern Washington University, which is right outside of Spokane, Washington, a small little town called Cheney. And that's the school with the red turf. If you've ever watched them on TV, you've probably seen them. Anyways, Jim was at that game, and he caught me at halftime. And, it wasn't like, hey, Jim, hey, Mike, it's good to see you. How you been? It was like, hey, Mike, I saw that, you went right into it. I saw that extra point you had. It was looking like it was going to miss left. You got to make sure that you're making all 10, put 10 goalposts behind that extra point goalpost and make all 10 of those. And I was like, whoa, geez, Jim, it's good to see you, buddy, But anyways, from that point on, and that was my junior year of college. So from that point on, I was all in. He came down to Idaho. He stayed with me in my apartment, and we worked every single day for a long time, and for as much time as he could, and go back and come back again. But it was very difficult to learn some of this stuff because it was so different. But the amount of time that we spent on it, and the effort that clearly he put in as coaching, and I put in as actually listening and doing the things he was saying, it came much quicker than most of the kids, as we've learned. Jim's first reaction was, after I got into the NFL using his style and form and technique and had the success that I did, when I retired and we decided to come up with this kicking academy, he was thinking, oh, this is going to be great. The kids would just listen like Mike did, and we'd have no problem. We'll have a bunch of kids in the NFL. Well, it's a lot harder than that. And I guess I just listened really well, and I did what he said. But it is challenging for some kids to do what we're saying, because it doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel good. And I bring up these other kicking coaches and academies out there in a certain light with regards to the mentality. They let these kids do whatever they want. They might give them a tip here or there. They might talk about a little bit of their philosophy, this and that. But their philosophy is, a lot of it has to do with what kids are going to do anyways. A lot of lateral leaning, a lot of opening up, a lot of big backswings, all that stuff. And we honestly are totally opposite of all that. I mean, it's a very odd thing to think, but a lot of stuff we teach goes way against everything else out there. And, the thing is, I did a lot more than all these other kicking coaches out there are doing right now today, these days. I did a lot more as far as my credentials and my experience playing in the NFL for 9 years at my size and all that stuff. And we still battle. The kids that think, what they're doing is right. And we'll tell them that, hey, if you do it this way, you'll have more of your body involved. But in order to do that, you have to kind of swing less. And they don't want to swing less. Nobody wants to swing less because they want the ball to go far. And what they think that, to make the ball go far, it requires them just to swing hard. So the difference between those kind of guys that want to swing hard with their leg and kick the ball far, they know how far the ball goes when they kick it because it's based on how hard they're swinging their leg. When I kick the ball, I don't really know exactly how far it's going. They all should go the same distance, regardless of if I'm kicking a 20-yard extra point or a 50-yard field goal. It should go the same distance because it's the same kick. And the stuff that I'm doing, it doesn't allow for a strong leg swing or a weak leg swing based on how far I am for the field goal. I kick the field goal the same regardless of how far I am away from it. So that is different than a lot of guys do. They kick it accordingly to how far it is. They'll just kind of tap an extra point. But when they get back to 50, they're kicking it harder. Or in between, when they're kicking it 30 yards, they're kicking it kind of hard. 45. Okay, I really got to put something into it now. Okay, 55. Are you kidding me? I really got to let it rip now. So they're working on 4, 5, or 6 different kinds of kicks based on how far the target is, when you should only just kick one way, and you don't get penalized if the ball goes too far on a field goal. So kick it hard, I don't want to say hard, but kick it firmly every single time, and do the same thing every single time. Work on the same sort of technique every single time, regardless, and good things will happen. So it's challenging, but it's rewarding. That's the benefit of all that. That is the hard work and dedication you put into this form, and once you get it down, and the smiles on these kids' faces once they hit that good one, like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about now. It becomes an addiction. You don't want to kick any other way. So that part I love, because they don't want to kick another way, and they'll just move forward with kicking the way we're teaching, and have lots of success.
Absolutely. And I find it really fascinating. You mentioned people trying to teach different ways to kick the football for different field goals, because when I played football, I only wanted to play kicker because of playing soccer, the classic cliche. And I remember it wasn't until I was at the University of Calgary where I met a kicking coach who had played in the CFL a long time before I was at University of Calgary. And he would say to me, okay, less is more. You don't need to be like all of the guys that he coached in the CFL were not really big and strong. Most of them weren't like 6'3", 6'4", but they were some of the most consistent guys in the league, because they would treat a 40-yarder like an extra point, which in the CFL used to be 12 yards, but obviously now it's moved back like the NFL, 32. So keeping that consistent swing and that form, no matter what, and maybe 50 plus, maybe a little bit more oomph, just a tad, but not like you're trying to crush it as hard as you can and an extra point you're tapping. Because one thing that he would talk about was when you try to baby the ball because you don't want to miss, you don't want to hit too hard, then that's when you get inconsistent in your swing. So learning these different little tips and tricks is always fascinating when it comes to the game of kicking, because I'm sure that you have heard many people say these kinds of things over the course of your career, and even still to this day, that everyone always thinks that they know a lot about kicking because it looks easier, because, oh, I could make that. But then cue the dramatic music. Okay, well then why don't you? So many people make fun of NFL kickers if an NFL kicker misses from 36, or if they missed from 40. Well, you should make that. But it's so much harder than it looks, especially when you can't worry about the distance. You have to go out there as if you don't even know where you're kicking from, because you're kicking it the same. You just know the direction you're kicking, right? You talk about that 10 goalposts behind the uprights. So when you got to the NFL, how did maybe your kicking mentality change in terms of staying on that level of consistency? Or what were some of the things that you utilized to ensure that you were able to find success when you knew that your next miss may be your last, because the NFL is so cutthroat?
Well, the first thing you have to realize, and this is crazy to even say, and I know, the reason why I'm saying this is because of the next thing I'm going to say, but you can't care where the ball goes. The reason I say that is because if you're so glued on trying to kick a ball a certain direction and distance and whatever, and height, we'll add that one in there, that you'll end up just athletically steering the ball. And that's what most kickers do. And there's kicking coaches that literally teach that kind of stuff, like just athletically kick it. And the best part about that whole process of that theory and that mindset really is the fact that if I can just trust my form and technique, that's all I need. If the form and technique is the foundation of my kicking, that is what I focus on in games. I knew that there was a period of time in my NFL career, probably right in the middle of it, maybe 2 or 3 years, probably 3 years in the middle of my 9 years of playing, 8 seasons really, of playing, that there's a 3-year period in there where I was extremely confident with my form and technique that I didn't really care. I was so, I'd line up to kick a field goal and I've already made it. And it's not because I mentally, thought about it or imagine the ball going through the uprights, which a lot of people would say, oh, you got a sports psychologist, they teach you how to deal with the stress and all that. I'm like, I never had one of those. I just focused and trusted my technique to do the work for me. And I relied on that part to make the kick. And it's a backwards way of thinking, because most people who are kicking a field goal, especially an important field goal, they are so focused on making that ball go a certain direction that they kind of more or less don't really think too much about their technique, or even if they have a technique that they would work on, a lot of times they don't focus on it because the priority of that situation at that moment is to make the kick. And so to make the kick, they will do whatever it takes to steer that ball through the uprights, when in reality, if you just trust your form and do what you've done a million times in a row prior to that kick, knowing that you're going to make that kick, just trust the form. It'll do it for you. And so, the mental side of kicking at the highest level of kicking or of football in the world, essentially NFL, you have to take pressure off yourself. Pressure is there. I promise you. I was nervous in every game. And, I had Tom Coughlin as my first NFL head football coach. Are you kidding me? Talk about nerves, man. Gee whiz. So if I add more pressure to myself than just those things alone that I just mentioned, I'm a nutcase at that point. So I couldn't do that. I had to really hey, I trust what I've been doing in practice for, however many years prior to that moment of kicking that game-winning kick or whatever the case may be. I trust that stuff. That's when guys second guess themselves if they show up on game day thinking they've got to do more on game day just because the kick counts now. Oh, I got to kick it. I got to make sure I got to get everyone there. I got to go through the uprights. I got to make sure everyone goes through. I got to kick them, 8 deep every time I hit the ball, on kickoffs. I got to do. They're already setting themselves up for failure because they've put in so much pressure on themselves to do those things they're telling themselves they got to do. And to do those things, do you think you're going to do something different with your form and technique to do those things? Probably, because you're like, oh, I gotta make it. So, I've seen it a lot where we've had athletes who've gotten into the arena league, and you clearly understand the goalposts are only 9 feet wide in the arena leagues. So form wise, when we're working with them, teaching them the pro form technique, they get really good with the technique, even kicking outside in regular goalpost settings where they're kicking on NFL posts or college posts or whatever. Their form is great. They're kicking the ball really good. Clearly there's no game, we don't have a refs or there's no fans. It's not a game. It doesn't really count. So the pressure's off there. So they're like, oh, I'm just going to do my form and we'll see, if I miss one, okay, whatever. Well, those same guys who put so much pressure on themselves when it counts, they go into the arena league as the kicker for the arena team. And all of a sudden their mind is like, oh my gosh, they see the goalpost so narrow. And even in practice and whatever, they kick very carefully. They kick not to miss instead of doing exactly what they did outside when we were working with them, kicking just perfectly fine. Form is great. Balls are flying. They get inside. Form goes out the window. I don't even recognize the athlete I'm watching. And the balls are going everywhere as well. I'm like, dude, what is going on? Why did you change so much? And that's the first reaction is like, I was just trying to make the kick. Well, you see what happens when you try to do something different than you've done a million times. And so that's the mental side of it, where people don't kind of understand that. They put so much importance on game day because the kicks actually matter now, that they change what they've done the entire time they've practiced that same kick. And so they're only shooting themselves in the foot. So that's the difference between someone who is mentally strong, and is able to able to deal with the pressure in the NFL and able to do well under that kind of situation or situations. It just becomes natural. You just rely on your technique. You've done it a million times. Just let that do the work for you. And it's a very relaxing feeling. It's such a very true, like, honest feeling, like, oh, all I got to do now is just put my foot on the ball and I've already, I'm going to make the kick regardless. So that's a very good point for a lot of guys who are kickers or punters or really any position in football. Wide receiver, oh, I got to make every catch, well, just catch the ball like you've done a million times in practice. Nothing's different. The field is still the same length, same thing with kicking. Goalposts are still the same, distance or same height. The field is the same distance. The yard marks are the same distance. The hash marks are the same distance. The only thing that looks different is that now you're in a stadium with fans, but everything else is exactly the same as you've worked on in practice. Why would you change a thing?
That's such an absolutely fascinating point that you make, because one thing that I have noticed from having played kicker and then watching you see guys on social media or people that are really good, you see guys just crushing the ball from 60, 65, 70, you name it. But then what ends up happening is, for example, people will see, leagues below the NFL as, oh, well, it's secondary, or that's just a stepping stone. But then you see these guys that are crushing the ball in workouts and whatnot. Then they get to that league that's so-called secondary, and they look different, and it's so strange. And I remember seeing some guys who had come up as like injury replacements, mainly if a CFL kicker was hurt. And I see them struggling, or maybe it's different. And I'm like, well, if the CFL is such an easy league, or it's second fiddle to the NFL or arena, then why does it almost look like it's harder than people make it out to be, right? Because of all the things you're talking about. That mentality is so important to carry, because you're right. Everything is the same. The only difference is that there's people that are making noise for you or against you. That's it. The coaches are all the same. The field is the same. You're doing the exact same things you've done a million times. And you see the difference in the people that succeed in the NFL versus the ones that don't. And especially at the kicker punter position, while it is obviously very cutthroat, and I think it could be the same based on your experience, the rotation of players and the turnstile, like rotation of guys from team to team, just keeps going up, because, well, it's just, obviously about money and who can get which player cheaper, who's better, cheaper and younger, all these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the guys, you look at someone like John Carney, he didn't play for one or two teams his career, but yet he's like top 5 in NFL history in points. Yeah, you may get a guy like a Vinatieri once in a while who stays around forever and ever and ever. But again, he's turning 48 years old and he's still able to get an NFL contract. And why is that? Because you look at his technique, it looks the exact same from when he was kicking a game-winning field goal in the Super Bowl against the Rams or the Panthers or whoever, versus when he's hitting a field goal in the snow against the Bills, and it's just absolutely snowy and ridiculous. So everything you brought up is just 100% spot on, and it shows in what you did in your career. So during your career, were there kickers that you looked up to, or guys that you admired the way that they played, or how did you rally with the community of guys who played at your position during your time with the Jaguars and with the other teams you played for?
Yeah, you mentioned John Carney. My first NFL experience as a kicker was in training camp with the Chargers in 1994. John Carney was their kicker, and I knew clearly it was an awesome opportunity for me as fresh out of college. I'm like, I knew I wasn't going to beat John out. However, I almost did, and the general manager had told me a year later about that. He's like, "Yeah, we almost took you." I'm like, wow, that's interesting, but. With regards to, John is like, I learned a lot from him, and just I admired his mentality and just the way he approaches, each kick. There's a lot of detail. He's very detail oriented, and he's a workhorse, man. That guy works out more than any player that I know, really, as far as a kicker is concerned. He's just, and still to this day, he's still in the weight room lifting weights and training guys and doing a lot of stuff. But all my teammates, guys that I've had, as far as punters, Brian Barker has been a huge help for me. A lot of the stuff I mentioned to you with regards to not trying to do anything different on game day, that's directly from Brian Barker's mouth. Like, he told me that. I said, listen, you don't have to do any more on game day than you've done in practice. So guys like that, just, I carry that information with me until the day I die. It's just great information. You learn so much from all these professional athletes that you've seen on TV and you admire, and it was just an awesome experience. I can't, pick out many more guys than a Carney or a Brian Barker, and Jeff Fiegels was another guy I was with in New York with the Giants, a workhorse as well. That guy was constantly doing drop and molds and catch drops and molds for punting, and again, just the mentality, and a lot of times the guys that have been really successful in the kicking and punting position, are the ones that are more laid back and chill, kind of reserved. Nothing bothers them. The guys that don't quite make it, you've seen them maybe come in and out of the NFL. Those are kind of the guys that, I don't want to say they make excuses, but they are always quick to come up with a reason why they missed, or, complain a little bit here and there, or we get really, really, really down on themselves, and they don't brush anything off, so they hold on to it. You miss a field goal and you got to let it go, man. You got to learn from it and let it go, but you can't hold on to it. Those are the deal breakers for a lot of kickers. If they hold on to those misses or bad kicks, then they're always thinking about it. And they revert to that kicking carefully process where they don't want to miss. So they're going to just kick it really carefully. And that's not what they normally do. So anyways, to your question, yeah, there's a lot of guys that I respect. And again, a lot of it has to do with their mental abilities, not necessarily their physical abilities, but just the way they approach things and how they think about the process of what it is they're doing professionally at the highest level of football, and so it's you got to commend those kind of guys like Morton Anderson, who I admired as a kid. And here I am, during the time I was playing against this guy, and he's just as quirky as me, just like, yeah. As a matter of fact, we did a training camp scrimmage against the Falcons when he was with the Falcons, and we were up there in Atlanta, or Sewanee, I believe it was. But I was talking to Morton, and this is one of the first times I actually had time to spend with Morton, and he said to me, he says, "Hey, Mike, I'll give you a little piece of advice." Kind of stand in the middle of the field. He goes, "See the goalpost down there?" I'm like, yeah. He says, "They're 18 feet 6 inches apart." I'm like, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. He goes, "Use every inch of that." That was his advice. I'm like, dude, you're like a legend, and that's the piece of advice you give me? Yeah, clearly. But that's just his mentality. It's a very chill, laid back mentality where he wanted to relax me. And it wasn't like I was wound up, tightly anyways, but that's just his attitude. And I love that about him. It's just, and he's extremely successful, obviously. So you can't have a lot of success being wound up too tight. You got to relax and just kind of let things flow and not worry too much about that. A lot of times guys get caught up into worrying about too much about things that are never going to happen anyways, or that never did happen. So I've given that advice to a lot of, kids that I'm, talking with or coaching or even doing some public speaking. I always mention that. It's always part of my public speaking, repertoire is don't worry about stuff so much, because if you look back and you think about the things that you worried about maybe a day or two or maybe 2 weeks prior to now, did they actually happen? 9 times out of 10, those things they worried about back then never even happened. So you just wasted all your time and energy and worry about something that never even happened. So what's the purpose of that? So again, there's a lot of weird, really cool mental things that will make or break people. And I think you just have to have the right attitude and learn from these guys. Like I've just mentioned, those names I've mentioned, learn from guys like that have been through there and they've done that. They've experienced the ups and downs, and what did they learn from those ups and downs? And I'm fortunate to even have the time that I've spent with those kind of guys to learn, from them, because it's helped shape me to be the guy I am today.
You mentioned the name Morton Anderson, and the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about guys that are really chill and laid back is what are seen as some of the most blunderous missed field goals that people can recall in NFL history in the last 25 years. Half of them have come from guys who were legends of the game. I'm sure that you remember very well during your playing career. We all remember. I mean, Jaguars fans, I must say, will remember, and players, what sent the Jaguars to the playoffs in their most magical Cinderella run in 1996. All Morton Anderson had to do was hit in a chippy from 31 and a slip and a wide left later. And the next thing you know, Jacksonville's off to Buffalo, and then Jacksonville's off to Denver, and then Jacksonville's off to New England. And it was 31 yards. And you'd think Morton Anderson, he's like, I think he's number 1 or number 2. Maybe Vinatieri broke it, but regardless, he held the record for most points in NFL history forever and ever and ever. And yet he still missed an easy field goal. Or John Carney. This was, I guess, a few years after your time with the Jaguars, but anyone who's ever watched SportsCenter or TSN or ESPN remembers the River City Relay. the Saints conjuring up the most insane multilateral touchdown in NFL history, all for the extra point to go wide right. And there's even videos I've seen about it that break down the science, that whole play in the game. And obviously, I'm sure I couldn't imagine what was going through John's head at the time, but guess what? He probably just said, oh, well, that sucks. He kept going because you look at the career he had. I'm sure that something like that didn't bog him down. And even though people say, oh, well, you missed and how could you do that? And that's terrible. But you look at someone like Blair Walsh, who had an amazing career, and then the heat from the playoff miss and never recovered. John Carney missed an extra point to keep the Saints season alive, even before the playoffs. Oh, well, kept going, right? So that difference in mentality is such an important thing that you touch on. And I really like that. That's such a key theme of kicking because, and again, to go back to something you talked about earlier, having Tom Coughlin as your head coach, especially your first head coach in the NFL, for anyone that ever paid attention to how he was as a head coach, he was definitely a meat grinder kind of guy, very tough, gritty, and was a no-nonsense coach. But you look at the success you guys had with the Jaguars in the late 90s, making the playoffs 4 years in a row. It wasn't a coincidence. It was definitely he was more product of his time with the Jaguars compared to later on years with the Giants, etc. But still, won multiple Super Bowls with them, is still considered a legendary NFL head coach. And you guys had amazing success with the team. So what I want to ask you then is, what was a time when you struggled in a game and how did you rebound from it? And when was a time in which after that moment you succeeded, and how did you relish with knowing that your mentality helped carry you back on track to success?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is it wasn't just one miss, it was three misses. And I'm not saying three just misses occasionally, it was three in a row. Okay. It was preseason in 96. So it was after my very first NFL year with the Jaguars. I was 20 of 27 on field goal. So needless to say, my position as a kicker was not solidified. However, they didn't bring in, they brought in a young college guy that it was definitely a very challenging, kicker as far as, to beat the guy out. But I think they had just released him prior to this game, but we were playing in New Orleans against the Saints. And I had missed two field goals in the previous game before that. Okay. Then coming into the Saints game, I'm sorry, it wasn't the Saints games. It was the Rams game against the Rams in preseason, St. Louis Rams in the Dome. I'm attempting the first field goal in that game and I miss it. I can't remember how far it was. So anyways, that makes three missed field goals in a row for me. So now I'm just like, man, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even know what, again, I wasn't thinking about my future. I was thinking about the next kick, and I was kind of nervous. Like, yeah, this is now I'm putting pressure on myself. I'm still young at that time, of course, and trying to learn from that, from the misses. But guess we line up the end of the half for a 54-yard field goal attempt. And I'm thinking, okay, great. This couldn't have turned out any worse for me. I've got three missed kicks in a row now. And now I've got to make this 54-yarder. And, if I miss it, I'm probably out of here. I already kind of knew, but I didn't, I had a lot to lose, but it was weird. I had a confident, I was kicking longer field goals better. And I did pretty much my career. I had not better success, but I felt more comfortable at longer distances. I just felt good. And so we had a delay a game because it's preseason and somebody came on the field late. So guess what we had to do? We had to mark off 5 yards because of the 5-yard penalty, delay a game. And I'm thinking that, it's the end of the half. I'm like, I'm not sure if he's going to keep me on the field. Pregame I was kicking maybe 56 or so, somewhere in there. But he kept me on the field. And I'm like, okay, now we're at 59 yards. So I'm like, I just have to kick it and hope and pray it goes through. And I hit that really clean. And guess what? I made it. And that was a kick right there that kind of solidified my position with the team clearly as far as the 96 kicker. And then, from that point on, but that was a mind trick for me in a sense that it gave me so much confidence because I knew that, all I had to do was just hit it firm, like hit a nice clean ball. And that's all I thought about when I made that kick. And that was like, wow, that worked. All I had to think about was just being, you know, again, that was kind of the beginning of me dumbing down the process of kicking, because before then I was thinking about way too much in every kick, and doing a lot of things I probably wouldn't have normally done, you know, in practice, like I mentioned earlier. And I was doing things differently on game day than I was on practice. But that specific kick was a make or break for me. And I didn't treat it like a make or break. I just treated it as, you know, I just got to hit it firm and just hope and pray for the best. And that the best happened for me. I made the kick. And that year I went on making 30 of 36 field goal attempts. I was an alternate to the Pro Bowl. Then in 97, I was 31 of 36 field goal attempts, and was the first player to go chosen to go to the Pro Bowl. So that was an incredible run for not only for me, but obviously for our team in the early 90s with the Jaguars going to all the playoffs so many years in a row, and our 96 season and then our 99 season, you know, going to 2 AFC championship games. So I felt good being a part of those winning, you know, teams that we had here in the Jaguar franchise, and a lot of history and a lot of fun stories to share too. So it was an awesome experience. And that was just a make or break kick for me. And I had to have it. And thank God I did, because I have no idea where I'd be living right now if I didn't, because I'm sure I would have got cut. I'm sure it would have been some other city. And then you fast forward to now, today, 20, however many years ago, and I'm still here in Jacksonville. So I love it.
That's an incredible story. And I'm sure if you've ever had any runs with Josh Scobie, you can say, hey, well, I'm the original that hit from 59. You just so happen to get the one on CBS with Ian Eagle on the call against Peyton Manning. But no less, both are amazing, and both are very important in the scope of Jaguars history, because I didn't even know that you had hit from 59 in a preseason game, and that kept your career alive, because you look at what you did with the team and the role you played. Same with Brian on special teams. You guys were such an important unit that stayed together through that successful era. And the consistency of those teams was really what carried you guys to overachieve, because as NFL fans remember, the Jaguars and who is this team? And, you know, get the National Guard on the phone. You got Shannon Sharp talking smack. And next thing you know, boom, this upstart second-year team beat the 13-3 Denver Broncos, coached by Mike Shanahan in Denver, beat John Elway. Absolutely crazy. So you guys did so many amazing things, and all the stories that are, I'm sure, littered in the history of the Jacksonville franchise are all related to the golden era. That's what people always talk about. So fans like myself, and not that I know many, have many friends that are fans of the Jaguars, as it would be very rare up here in Canada, but definitely some special times you guys had. And I'm sure that there were so many more memorable games than just the ones that people talk about on NFL Network after the fact. But I want to ask you, what is the funniest story you can ever remember from your time playing for the Jaguars?
I'm laughing because there's so many, but Brian Barker and myself, we had a lot of time on our hands, clearly, as kickers and punters. And, it wasn't like we didn't do anything. We did a lot of work. We did a lot of conditioning. Actually, we'd probably do more conditioning than the teams did. The team did really during the practice time. So we would do, conditioning after we were done with our kicking. And then sometimes, the team, depending on how we're playing, depending on Tom Coughlin's mood, we would have to do some conditioning as a team at the end of practice. Well, of course, we're not going to say, oh, we already did our conditioning, so we're in it. Anyways, I like to babble a lot. I get caught up into different stuff. But so this story, our equipment managers, we always mess with them. Of course, we mess with other players, we mess with equipment managers. And we had this guy by the name of Tucker, who was an assistant equipment manager, and he would drive a golf cart around a lot. And he was parked, and I don't know if it was him or one of the video guys. Either way, he parked the cart kind of by the tent that Brian and I were in. And we'd always kind of thought about this, but we kind of MacGyvered a system within the, of course, we had to do it real secretly and real quick. We grabbed a piece of aluminum and basically rigged the horn on the golf cart to turn on and stay on when the key turned on. So we, so we did that. So we set it up. Okay. So we, at the end of practice, we didn't have to do any running or anything. And I think it was either equipment guy, I think it was Tucker. He had to take the golf cart or the cart in for to give get the video started. So they're taking the video into the equipment room to get it all cut up just for our, the post practice, meetings and stuff like that. So the coaches can watch the film. And so they want to get it in there, fast. So practice breaks. Tom Coughlin has the entire team in the middle of the field. He's given his speech about the day of practice. And all of a sudden we hear this horn. It went on and then it went off real fast. And then Brian and I kind of looking out the corner of our eyes, and it went on and then it went off real fast. And then it went on and it stayed on. So what he did was he turned the thing on and he heard the horn. He's like, oh crap, turned the key off, turned it back on again. It heard the horn again, because clearly it was staying on. If the key's on, it's on. And he just said, screw it, I got work to do. So he turned the cart on and just drove all the way around practice field with the horn blaring nonstop. And Tom is just looking like, what in the world is going on? He's getting mad, actually. So the whole team is like, what the heck? And Brian and I are just high-fiving each other like, you got to be kidding me. That worked. That was hilarious. And then, of course, we have time, but you don't want to mess too much with the players because we as kickers have a lot of time. And, if we would put their street clothes that they came in, we go in their locker room or their locker and take their street clothes, throw them in the pool, and then throw those clothes into the freezer. So when they're done with practice, they got to get their clothes out of the freezer that are nice and hard. Like, what do you do then? You have to wait for a while. You got to throw them in the dryer. So there's a lot of pranks that we did, but of course we got to watch over our shoulders too, because what comes around goes around, if you know what I mean. So, but those were just great times, man. We had some really good times with the Jaguars. One thing I'll mention about Tom Coughlin and the teams, the players we had on those teams back in the 90s. We had a lot of great camaraderie. We had a lot of great athletes on the team that were team players. They were buddies. They were the guys that really got along really well together. And I think Tom Coughlin deserves all the credit in the world for bringing in those kind of guys. And I believe that's the reason why we were so successful that early, was because we were able to, be a team, of individuals that were doing things for other guys, that wouldn't let the other guys down, very accountable, respectful, humble guys that were not in it for just the money and the fame and arrogance and all. They were in it for the team. They wanted to win for the team, the city, the other players, the teammates, the coaches, clearly the city. So that's really a very proud thing that I hold on to with regards to that, because that I think had a huge deal with our team and how we were so successful, because we didn't want to let our guys down. We were very accountable to each other, and Tom was an amazing coach that brought in amazing players, and that's kind of the summary of the 90s for the Jaguars. I think that's really what that got us to be the level we were.
100%. And as kickers and punters, you always got to know that you got to look twice and check both ways before pulling pranks, because especially at the NFL ranks, there's going to be guys coming after you, and you're going to be one that they're targeting next when it comes to throwing clothes in the freezer or whatever it is. Especially as a kicker, you always know that people in NFL teams or just football teams in general, regardless of legal, say kickers and punters are so weird, man. They always have to be an oddball. That's the only way that you can really fit the stereotype of the position. But in all honesty, kickers and punters are usually just pretty normal people that seem weird because they have all this time on their hands. And that's what gets them up to no good and pulling all these pranks, because you mentioned all the guys who are really chill and laid back, just whatever. They look like regular, normal people in the street. You wouldn't really see them as pro athletes when you're going to the store or when you're at the mall or anything. When you see other guys, you see a really big, tall lineman, or you see a quarterback, like, oh, wow, they must be on a pro football team. You see a kicker or punter, like, just like a regular guy could work at a retail store. You never know. But hey, never underestimate the athleticism of a kicker, or at least the importance of kickers and punters, because kickers and punters are people too.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that Brian and I were real good at was, we were team players, and I think we earned the respect from our teammates. And that's, people say, oh, did your teammates get really down on you? Did they threaten your life, or did they, threaten to beat you up if you missed a kick? And I'm like, no, not one time did I ever have anything like that before in my life. And I think it's because, I earned the respect from the other athletes on the field, the other players in their respective positions. But as a kicker, I did a lot of work as well. I wasn't playing golf, during the middle of practice. I didn't go inside and get pizza. I didn't do that. We stayed outside. We worked out. We looked busy. We were busy. We really worked hard on our skill and our craft. And so just by doing that, I think gave our teammates the impression that, we're team players. We're working hard to, do our jobs clearly, but also to help the team win. And I think that the kickers that are, like you mentioned, that the ones that are kind of weird and, they have time on their hands, but they don't want to engage with the other athletes because they might think they're weird. And, maybe they don't like kickers. They don't want to talk to them. No, man, I wasn't like that at all. I talked to every guy on the field, every guy in the locker room. We were all buddies, and didn't matter what team I was on, whether it was the Bills or Giants or Jaguars. I really wanted to make a point that, I'm here too. I want to make tackles. I'm going to get in there. I'm going to hit. I'm going to do what I'm here to do. I'm a football player. I'm not just a weird kicker. I'm not going to just do my job and then stop and, kick a ball and then go hide in the corner. I'm not that guy. So, and I think that what happened is it earned the respect from my teammates, and they treated me like another player. So I think that's a huge deal for kickers to really understand. If you don't want to be that guy that everyone hates, first off, work really hard, and try your best to make your kicks. You're not going to make every one of them. But when you do, don't make excuses. Just you take full responsibility for that miss, and you move forward from it. And guys see that, they understand that, they know exactly what's going on. So I commend those guys that have given me the respect as a kicker and as a football player. So I think that's kind of the kicker's responsibility. If they want to be an athlete and be another team player and a guy on the team, you gotta earn the respect by working hard and showing these guys you're not any different than they are.
No doubt. There's no really better way to put it, because you're a part of the team, and special teams is 1/3 of the game. And Absolutely. The kicker and punter are shouldered with the task of being the most important focal points almost 90% of the time on every special teams play, because the way that it goes depends on where the ball is going, right? So the way that you develop the mentality, again, it shows to what you were able to accomplish in your career individually, with Brian as a special teams teammate of yours, and with the whole Jaguars organization, what you guys did as a team. So Mike, we're getting towards the end of our time on today's episode. So I want to ask you a few quick wrap-up questions, have some fun before we part. So first question I want to ask you is, who would you say is your closest celebrity lookalike?
I've heard Tom Cruise. I'm not sure. I mean, it depends on his picture. It depends on how it's usually the smile, I guess. The Tom Cruise smile is, I guess, what I kind of look like. That's the only one really I've heard before.
Who was the quietest teammate you played with on the Jaguars?
Oh boy, I don't know if we had anybody that was very quiet. They were all pretty humble. Gary Walker was kind of a quiet guy. Ronaldo Wynn was kind of a quiet guy, but I don't mean quiet in a bad way. Just mm-hmm. real humble and real businesslike. Just in there to do the job and not always serious, but I don't know if they were watching this and they said, well, I don't know, they wouldn't think that they were that quiet. But those are two guys I can think of off the top of my head. But there wasn't a lot of guys that were quiet. They were very talkative and fun.
Yeah, and especially even like being humble and stuff can definitely fall into that category, because maybe not like they don't say nothing, but they're not like the big rah rowdy kind of guys. Who would you say was the scariest teammate you ever came upon on first interaction in Jacksonville? Like you saw them and you were just like, oh my goodness.
Jonathan Ogden is a monster. Eddie George, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't ever want to come anywhere near him. If I got to tackle him, I don't know. Good luck. Those guys were just physically, just unbelievably, just chiseled and just something like you don't ever see. Those were big guys. A guy by the name of Clyde Simmons, who was our teammate of mine on the Jaguars. He was a very intimidating guy if he wasn't on your team, but he would mess around with me and practice and stuff and try to get in my head. But he was a nice guy, really, really nice guy. But he would just kind of try to, be kind of monstrous and mean, and he'd say so. I can't say it on air or whatever, but he would say some things to me prior to, trying to make a kick, because that's what they did. That was they're doing this for me. They're trying to distract me to make me better in games. Mm-hmm. Those are guys that I was very intimidated by. Yeah, for sure.
What is the most memorable or inspiring thing that you remember a teammate or a coach telling you during any single game that you've played in the NFL?
Larry Pasquale was our special teams coach in Jacksonville for 6 of the 7 years I was there. And he told me that I was second guessing myself, and he was absolutely right. He says, Mike, you're doing everything wrong. And it wasn't like he was saying this in a mean way. He was saying, I don't recognize the form you're using today. And you didn't do this in practice, and you're second guessing yourself. And I'll never forget that when he said that, I was like, oh my gosh, he's absolutely right. I'm second guessing myself, because that was back before I got the advice from Brian Barker about how not to, don't change anything on game day. And I was second guessing myself, thinking I had to change things on game day. And so, Larry was the one that kind of mentioned that, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together until Brian had mentioned to me, you don't have to do anything different on game day. And that's really what Larry was saying. So that was a very a good piece of advice from a coach. There's players that would say things, before a kick, and I kind of wanted to be a little bit alone. I didn't want to talk a lot before a kick, so I just want to be focused. But sometimes guys would come over and say, and I can't remember any specific person, or maybe Joel Schmingy would say something to me occasionally, but as far as making a kick, but he kind of had a smirk on his face, he had that Southern accent. Let's go ahead and make this one now, Mike. Okay. All right. And that was kind of, settling down the situation, like calming my nerves. And that's a good thing to have, because, guys see that you're a little nervous. They want to, calm you down a little bit and say, hey, let's make this kick and go home. That's another thing. Dave Whitell said to me, I think it was the game winner against Baltimore in 96, I believe, or playing in Baltimore in Memorial Stadium, in that old stadium in Baltimore. And it was in overtime. We got a fumble. And I'm out there to kick the ball, and Dave Whitell came up to me, put his hands on my shoulder. He goes, "Let's just get this kick and go home, all right?" Just like that, in the middle of a game. Like, okay, So that kind of stuff is good. And I know Mark Brunell was like that too in the huddle, and he said that some things to me to make me calm down and kind of know that he's on my side, sort of thing. But I know I've heard, of course, I'm not in the offensive huddles ever, but I know in the huddles he would say those kind of things to guys, and you've probably seen him on NFL films and stuff like that may not have been Mark, but any other guys, any quarterback or leader on the team would get in the huddle and just kind of crack a joke or something, just to get the guys to lighten up a little bit and just say, hey, let's have fun, don't take this so serious, work hard, let's win this game as a team, let's do it, guys, that kind of stuff. So I just love to hear those kind of things, and it's necessary. You do need that.
I do want to say, I love the fact that you brought up, quarterback going into the huddle, because on the previous episode I'd had with Leon, he talked about 8 minutes left in the game, fourth quarter against Denver. He says, Mark Brunell comes in the huddle and says, are y'all having fun yet? Look at this. We're up 3 points. We're going to go down. We're going to go down, score a touchdown. We're going to win this freaking game. And the way that he said that, it's like, wow, I can't even imagine. Like, everyone's just nerves must have went from this to just right down. And then next thing you know, the most iconic touchdown scored in the history of the franchise came as a result at the end of that drive from the beginning when Mark said that. So you can really see the difference in when you're calm and having fun versus when you're worried and putting unnecessary pressure on yourself, because you're already in the NFL. Like, everyone's already watching every little thing you do. So don't put yourself through it twice.
Yeah. And some guys would throw Tom Coughlin in there and say, we're working for this guy. He's a dictator. He's this and that. He's always chewing our butts. And he's putting pressure on us like that. And we would kind of play our games in a way that we're going to, Tom's calling the shots, but we're the team. We're going to win this for us. And Tom and coaching staff, team and city and all that. But that was kind of sometimes an attitude too. We had to kind of find ways to calm everyone down based on just being around Tom and the way he was at times. But, you look back and you're like, it wasn't bad. It was just that he was very disciplined on what he wanted. which I understand, and back then a lot of guys didn't, including myself. It was kind of hard to stomach some of the things he would do and some of the rules he had. But, you look back and think, you know what, I know now exactly why he was doing that. And I respect that. I really do. And even if you had the whole, Jaguar teams on this podcast right now, and, talking about Tom Coughlin, I'm sure, good, very, very large majority of those guys would say the same thing. Back then they didn't like him too much because he was too hard on them, and he made these ridiculous rules, this and that. But nowadays you look back like, you know what, I learned a lot from that. It really did make me the person I am today. And these guys as well. I'm sure it instilled a lot of discipline and a lot of perfectionism within, things that they're doing on a daily basis, even today in their normal lives. So I commend Tom for that. And I look back at those days and kind of chuckle because, you think you're getting yelled at, but he's just being disciplined. He's just trying to teach you, how to deal with things. And I love him for it. It's great stuff.
The final question I want to ask you is, what is the most memorable game you played in for the Jaguars throughout your entire career?
It had to have been that Buffalo game, that first playoff game in 1996. Coming in as a clear underdog, we're not supposed to beat the Bills. And, I was extremely nervous in that game. I don't know, especially the first field goal, which was a short field goal. It was like 27 yards. But there's only 2 times I remember my legs literally shaking before a kick. That was one of them. And the other time was my very first kick in the NFL with the Chargers in preseason. I was shaking. I was so nervous, but those are the only 2 kicks I remember being that nervous. But I do remember that game, a lot of it, because it was such an exciting game for our franchise, for the team. We weren't expected to win that game. I would say the Denver game, that was a very good game too. Clearly we're not expected to win that one. So that's a very, very close second. But the reason I bring the Buffalo Bills game up is because of the kick that I had at the end. I remember that kick because that was probably one of the most solid kicks I've ever had in my life. It was 45 yards and it hit the top of the right upright. And, quick story about that. Not a lot of people realize this, but I got wiped out on that kick. I kicked the ball, I hit it. You play golf, if you're a kicker or whatever, you hit a good ball, you hit it the second you do. And, hit it well. So I hit it well. I look up and I'm watching it go right down the middle. And all of a sudden, boom, I get wiped out from some guy that came across the field, across our protection really, really late. Wipe my legs out. I'm looking up at the sky thinking, oh my gosh, I just got, I wonder if there's a flag. It's the first thing I thought was, are you going to call a flag and are you going to get the points? Because I knew it went through. And Brian Barker is reaching down with his hand to help me up because he had the look in his eyes like, dude, we got lucky. It went through. And I was like, what do you mean? It was going right down the middle. And he said, watch the replay. And I was like, oh my gosh, watch the replay. And the wind just totally took that ball. But I hit it so solid. So that was one of those things where, the luck was on our side a little bit there with regards to the bounce because it clearly went in. And that was just that solidified that game to me as far as one I'll never forget. I had 3 field goals in that game and we won by 3. And then, of course, we repeat the same sort of actually the same score. And I had 3 field goals in the game against Denver, too. So good times. Those 2 games are both the most memorable games. And then I'll add on to the Denver game, flying back from Denver, flying over the stadium and doing that whole, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't even know what time it was. It was really late. But we had, 30,000 fans in the stadium at 3 o'clock in the morning waiting for us to come home. I don't know if it's quite 30,000. It was a lot. And that's when Dave Wydell gave a little speech, Jacksonville, do you believe in miracles? And, they had the owners out there and they had all the speakers set up and we were, just talking to fans and just thanking everybody for all their support and just flying over the stadium and seeing those fans. You could literally see them from the air and waving their arms. They knew it was us as well. So that was an experience I'll never forget either.
Mike, I want to thank you so much for having been on today's episode. It was an incredible pleasure to talk about kicking footballs, talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars and all the great games and the mentalities and so many of the things that you learned that made for an absolutely phenomenal career. So everything you mentioned today, I'm super grateful for the time you gave to me on today's episode. It was so much fun. I really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. I enjoyed it. It was good.
Well, thank you for listening to today's episode of former All-Pro kicker who played 9 years in the NFL and Jacksonville Jaguars place kicker and the owner of Pro Form Kicking Academy, Mike Hollis.